This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
Okay, welcome everyone. Today I'll be looking at, as the final week, some exam information. I'll be doing a course and a review topic. Just to give you some reminders about what's happening this week, I'll go to the course website once that comes up on the screen and show you what's on for this week. So I'll be going through the structure of the sample exam during the lecture today, as well as answering any specific questions you have about the exam, and also giving you some tips and strategies in terms of approaches to study for the actual exam. Hopefully, yes, here we go. Okay, so a reminder that quiz 4 is to be completed this week, so this is your final online quiz, so make sure you get that done by the end of the week. So I've got the lecture slides up here. The tutorial basically tells you I'll be going through the sample exam. Here's a link to the quiz. Now, just for your information, the sample exam is actually available via the assessment tab. If you scroll down to A4 examination, you will see the sample exam there. Either tomorrow or at the beginning of next week, underneath here will be the sample exam solutions. Okay, so you'll also have the solutions to the sample exam. Any questions in relation to the actual exam, if I don't cover them today, feel free to post them on the forum. Another thing you can also do is have a look at the UniSA exams and results page, which I'll click now. If you've got any questions about what you should be doing before the day of the exam, on the exam day, when results are going to be released, click on that link via the course website, and it gives you quite a lot of information about exams and results. Another thing I'd also direct you to, which you should all have emails, is the course evaluation. I'd very much appreciate it if you could fill out the evaluation for the course, so I can gauge how well the course is run, some feedback that you may have on the course, whether there are any improvements that can be made, whether there are any things that you found really useful, so I can use those to determine if what I'm doing is fine, if I can make some changes, etc., etc. And also, if I've been your tutor, if you can also do an evaluation on me as a tutor, but if you've had May as well, if you can do the evaluation for your actual tutors, that would be much appreciated. So let's have a look at the actual lecture slides. So the actual exam, it's a 2-hour exam, 120 minutes plus 10 minutes reading time. Hopefully you all know when the exam is. Is there anyone here that doesn't know when the exam is? Okay. You should all know the venue, you should know the location, you should know the date, the day and the time. I will be at the exam for the first 20 minutes, so if you do have any glaring questions or anything you need to ask me on the day, I will be there for the first 20 minutes. So the exam has 3 parts. The first part is 20 questions, and I'm recommending that you spend 20 minutes on the first part for 20 marks. Part B, you need to answer 4 out of the 5 questions, and again 20 minutes I recommend for 20 marks. Part C, you need to answer 4 out of 5 questions. Again, I recommend 80 minutes, that's worth 40 marks. Okay, so the exam is out of 80 in total. In terms of instructions, the exam is part open book. What I mean by part open book is that you can take in 1 double-sided sheet of A4 handwritten notes. Must be handwritten. You can highlight, you can underline, you can do whatever you like, but it must be handwritten, otherwise it will get taken away from you. You need to pass the exam to pass the course, so aim for, well, work on 40 out of 80, okay? Work on 80 out of 80 and then you should pass the exam, as I said in the tutorial this morning. So all materials that are supplied to you in the exam, so you'll be supplied with some scrap paper, you'll be supplied with the question paper, you'll be supplied with a 16-page examination booklet to write your answers in, and your sheet of notes. All of that information must be handed back to the invigilators at the end of the exam. You cannot take anything back out with you. Electronic dictionaries and calculators are not permitted in the exam. So part A is multiple choice, exactly the same style as the online quizzes that you've been doing up until now, so the same types of questions. You need to answer all 20 questions, they're all worth 1 mark each. The answers to the multiple choice questions you need to answer on the answer sheet which is provided at the end of the examination paper. And I'll show you what that looks like in the sample exam. Probably no, at the end of this at the moment. Make sure your name and IDs are recorded on the sheet and do not detach the sheet from the rest of the examination paper. Okay, so make sure you don't rip that sheet off. Keep it attached to your question paper because it may get lost, you may forget to put your name on it, and therefore your section A might potentially not get marked. As I said, all questions are worth 1 mark each. You do not lose marks if you get an incorrect answer. So if you don't know the answer, take a strategic or an intelligent guess as to what you think the right answer is. I will actually show you what I mean by that answer sheet by opening up the sample exam. So that's what the answer sheet looks like, multiple choice answer sheet at the end of the exam. Okay, and basically you need to specify A, B, C or D as your response to any particular question. By placing a cross through that answer. I specify using a pen or a pencil. I suggest you use a pencil in case you get it wrong. You place a cross through either A, B, C or D. Okay? Having a cross through A and a cross through D, you'll get the answer wrong. Okay? You can only specify one answer. If you specify A and then you realise that you're wrong and the answer should be C, either rub out or scribble out A so it's clear to me which one you are actually answering. Okay, so multiple responses, you'll get 0 for it, but if you clearly cross one out and have another go, then that's fine. So again, if you're not sure, make sure you answer each question. Put your name and ID at the front. Don't rip this off the back of the examination question booklet. Part B is a series of short answer questions, similar to the pre-class activity questions we've been doing in tutorials on a weekly basis. Okay, you'll be given 4 questions and you need to answer, you'll be given 5 and you need to answer 4 out of 5. So you've got a bit of an option there in which ones you choose to answer. If you choose to answer all 5, only the first 4 will be marked. If you answer 4, and then you realise you do want to answer the 5th one because you might score better, then cross out the one that you don't want to be included from the first 4 that you've already answered. Okay, so answering all 5, I'll only mark the first 4. If you answer 5 and cross one out, then we'll mark the 4 that are still remaining. Part B needs to be answered in the examination answer booklet, which has got like 16 pages with blank lines. So this is where you need to put the answers to Part B. It's a 16-page booklet. You only have to answer 4 questions, and you have to answer 4 questions in Part C. So that's 8 questions in total. You've got 16 pages, so there's no reason why you can't dedicate a page per question, or even for the short answer sections, you know, 2 questions per page. What I'm suggesting is don't try and squeeze the answers to all 4 questions on one page. You've got a lot of room, okay? And you might not know the complete answer to one of the questions in the beginning, so leave yourself ample room, okay? Another thing, make sure you clearly label what question you are answering. So Part B, question 1. Part B, question 2. Part B, question 4. Part B, question 5. Part C, question 1, etc., etc. Make it clear which question you are actually answering for which section. types of questions you may be asked, in addition to what's given in the sample exam. You might be asked something to do with structured English, so you may be given a short scenario and asked to represent that in structured English. Maybe ask some questions about classes and UML relationships in terms of understanding the types of relationships we can have with classes in terms of abstract classes, association classes, the inheritance classes, okay? Things like that. You could be asked some questions about information gathering techniques. We've looked at various techniques throughout the course in terms of how to gather information. You need to understand and have an appreciation for functional and non-functional requirements. What is a functional requirement? What is a non-functional requirement? In particular, the FERPS Plus acronym that we've looked at for functional and non-functional requirements. We've looked at stakeholders a number of times, so you may be given a scenario and be asked to identify or represent stakeholders. Maybe some questions on use cases and use case descriptions. In the assignment, you've recently provided some information about use cases and also some short use case descriptions. Could have a question about the system development life cycle. Need to understand the distinction and have an appreciation for what a methodology is, what models are and what tools are and what techniques are from the perspective of a systems analyst, and how these are useful for a systems analyst. Oops. So Part C is the applied knowledge questions. Part C is worth 40 marks. Okay, again, you need to answer 4 out of the 5 questions. Again, same principle. If you answer 5, the first 4 will get marked. If you want to answer 5, cross the one out that you don't want marked. These also need to be answered in the examination booklet with the lines on the pages. Each question is worth 10 marks. For the applied knowledge questions, these are similar to the in-class activities that we've been doing. So I've given you some pre-class activities with some short answer questions, paragraph style or bullet points. Then when we've been coming to class on a weekly basis, or if you've been going to class on a weekly basis, I've asked you to work in your groups to create some sort of maybe use case diagram or system sequence diagram or class diagram, etc., or activity diagram. We've looked at those kinds of activities within the tutorials, and hopefully you've been working in your groups to come up with solutions to those problems. That's pretty much the nature of what Part C is going to look like. You'll be given a scenario and you'll be asked to represent that scenario using a certain diagram or model or a structure that we've covered in the in-class activities in class. So, for example, you might be asked to produce a use case diagram. All of those things that are listed there. Okay, in addition to what's in the sample exam type questions. Yep, there you go. So there's quite a number of things that we've covered, and that's some examples of what you might be asked to produce. So you are allowed to take in the 1A4 double-sided sheet of handwritten notes. You are also allowed to take in printed language translation or English dictionaries. However, I strongly suggest that you have your own, and or if you're going to borrow someone's, make sure that there are no handwritten notes in those dictionaries. If there are any handwritten notes in the dictionaries, you'll be up for academic misconduct and it'll be taken away from you. So please, if you're going to bring in the dictionaries, make sure there are no notes inside those dictionaries. Okay? In terms of how much to write for the sections, obviously section A is 20 multiple choice, so you just need to put A, B, C, D. Part B is the short answer type questions. They're all worth 5 marks each. If you're asked to list 5 things, list 5 things. If you're asked to talk about a couple of scenarios, you know, a few short paragraphs, okay? For Part B, I don't expect 1-page answers, okay? But where you can, and if you can provide a diagram, if you can provide an example, a certain scenario, it's even better for you. But we'll talk about that when I show you the sample exam. Consulting hours, you should have all received a note on the Learn Online forum. I've posted my consulting hours. I'll be consulting Tuesday and Thursday next week and Wednesday in the first week of exams. So if you need to come and see me, if you've got some questions, I'm happy to sit down and work through some things for you. Alternatively, I am available via email or phone if we need to have a chat. You will receive your assignment results before the exam, within either end of next week or early the week after. Okay, so you will know where you're standing in the course once you've received those assignment results. So the sample exam, as I said, is available on the course website and provides you with an idea of the types of questions you'll get in the exam. So let's have a quick look at that exam now. So the front page obviously won't look as bare as that. It'll ask you to put your name and ID up the top. Along the right hand side there'll be like a table of columns that has the questions and the amount of marks they're worth and a bit more information on the front page. But from the second page onwards, the real exam will basically look the same as the sample exam, obviously with different questions in there. So part A, multiple choice, 20 marks. Your instructions are up the top. It's the same instructions you'll get in the real exam. Okay, 20 questions. Use the answer sheet provided at the back. Don't rip it off. All questions are worth 1 mark each. Okay, so you've got your 20 multiple choice questions. Part B, answer 4 out of the 5 questions below. Again, if you answer the first 4, that's fine. If you answer all 5, only the first 4 will get marked. Now, I've got the solutions to these. I will put the solutions to these on the website. If you still haven't had your tutorial for the week, you should be going through them in your tutorial this week. So that's what we've been doing, going through the sample exam and the answers on the in the tutorial, and they will be on the website. So I won't be going through the answers today, just so much giving you strategies and tips in terms of how to answer these types of questions. So you can see for the short answer questions, it's broken down into a couple of sub-questions, and where I can, I've broken those questions down into the sub-parts. So you can see how many marks they're worth.
Sorry, is that the sort of questioning that section is like exactly the same as the tutorial question?
You will not get the same questions that you've had in the tutorial questions. There'll be new questions.
Yeah, but that's like similar.
Similar type, yeah. Yep, similar. So the tutorial is a good basis to start with, okay, in terms of the types of questions that you'll get. So, for example, the first question asks, compare collecting information by interview and by questionnaire. It's an information gathering requirements type question. You need to have an understanding about what an interview is, what a questionnaire is, talk about each in their own right, what they're used for, when they're used, the types of questions you might include, the way you distribute and carry out an interview versus a questionnaire. Provides demonstrates an understanding of those different requirements gathering methods. Then you need to give an example of when these methods would be appropriate. Again, talking about what are pre and post conditions, 3 marks, why are they important, 2 marks. Looking at use case diagrams, 2 marks, and some explanation. What's an activity diagram and the symbol. So it's really important, and as I suggested to everyone in my tutorial today, you've got that double-sided sheet of notes. One thing that I strongly urge that you do, somewhere on that page, is draw a sample of every single thing that we've covered, diagram, or every diagram or every model that we've covered. Okay? And put a label on it and say, this is what a use case diagram looks like, this is what an activity diagram looks like, this is what a use case description looks like, this is what a decision tree looks like, this is what a decision table looks like. So you're not stressing on the day in terms of thinking about, what is an activity diagram? I don't know what it looks like. I don't want you to have that stress on the day. I want you to be able to understand the diagram and understand how to apply, for a given scenario, your understanding of that scenario to produce the diagram. Okay? The last thing I want to do is have someone provide an activity diagram when I've asked for a sequence diagram. Okay? I don't want the wrong diagrams produced. So a strategy is just put little copies of those diagrams on your sheet and label them so you at least know what the diagram is if you are asked for it. And again, that can help in answering some of the questions in the short answer questions as well. So know what the diagrams are, know the symbols used in the diagram, know the terms associated with those diagrams, and know the situation and the context in which it's best to use those diagrams as a systems analyst. So again, this is pretty much saying what I said before about the other types of questions you could be asked. Again, section C, I've actually got some scenarios here. You need to again answer 4 out of the 5 questions. First one is a use case diagram, so you're given a short scenario. A way to approach the question, What's a use case diagram? I know the use case diagram is that one with the circles and the actors and the system boundary. That's the first thing you need to tell yourself. Okay, what do I need to draw? Draw up the system boundary. What's the next thing I need to do? Look for the actors. Who are the actors in this scenario? You read the scenario to determine who the actors are. Okay, we can see from the first sentence a customer's interaction, so we're going to have a customer. You can see from the last line in the first paragraph, the branch manager receives some information. So the branch manager is another actor. Start plugging in your actors, then start thinking about what else do I need in a use case diagram. I need to have those ovals. What do those ovals represent? The primary functions of the system. So what is actually happening in the system? Well, we can see that the customer is making a withdrawal, the depositing request, doing a balance inquiry. So these are some of the primary functions. So you start creating some ovals and putting labels in those ovals to determine what's going on in the system. Then once you've done that, you determine who are the actors that interact with those functions within the system, and then you draw your lines from your actors to the ovals. Okay, then you've kind of 80% there to coming up with a reasonably good use case diagram. Okay, so for each of the scenarios, think about the diagram, think about what it's asking you to create, think about the logical steps involved in creating those diagrams, then start reading the scenario and pulling out the bits of information that you need to then put down onto paper to create that particular model for that scenario. Yes?
Can we draw the diagrams with pencil?
By all means, you can draw them in pencil. I would draw them in pencil, yes, of course. As long as they're legible, that's fine. Most definitely, you can use pencil. So the second question is asking about a domain model class diagram. What is a domain model class diagram? It's got some squares on it. Okay, we start drawing some squares. What do those squares represent? Our classes. So I'm basically giving you a guide as to what I want you to show in the domain model. Show some classes with attributes. Understand what an attribute is. Show some relationships. What is a relationship? How do we label relationships? Multiplicity constraints. What is a multiplicity constraint? So have an understanding of the terms and the things that go and are associated with those particular diagrams in order to be able to then create those diagrams. Third one is asking for a system sequence diagram. Got a bit of a scenario here, and you are asked to create a system sequence diagram for the use case checkout books from library. So this is an entire scenario about a university library system. You need to then pick out from this scenario the sections that relate to the checkout books use case, and then create a system sequence diagram for that particular use case. Question 4 is also referring back to the same scenario. So you might be given questions which are asking you to do certain things based on the same scenario. So in question 4, you need to create an activity diagram for the use case return books. So it's not the same use case. Same scenario, but different use cases. Okay, so you might be given one scenario and asked to draw different things or model different things based on different aspects of a scenario. Understand what an activity diagram is. Understand that you need your actors, your swim lanes, your starting activity, your ending activity, your flow of activities. Do you need to represent synchronization? Do you need to represent decisions? Do you need to represent loops? Do you need to represent the flow of activities? What is the naming convention and the syntax that we use in these particular diagrams? Is it the verb-noun phrase? Okay, so think about the terminology of how we represent things also in these particular diagrams. So as I said, other types of questions you could be asked are based on these. And these are the things I was referring to. So section C gives you some examples of diagrams. Create yourself a little copy of each of one of these diagrams on your cheat sheet and label them so you know what they all look like. And question 5, well, that would be question 5, but I haven't included 5 questions in the sample exam. As I said, very similar in nature to the types of questions you've been doing in your tutorials with your groups and the in-class activities, because you've had to create a lot of these diagrams in your in-class activities. You've also had to create a number of these in your group assignment as well, okay, based on a given scenario. So you should have had, or if you haven't, go back and try doing those for yourself in terms of practicing, getting an understanding of What is the diagram? How can I convert this written language into something that looks like that particular diagram? And it's easy to look at the answer and say, yeah, I've got it, I know how to do it. But what I really strongly suggest is try doing your tutorial questions without looking at the answer. So you can mentally go through the thought process of looking at a scenario and extracting the information from that scenario to come up with a diagram. Once you've had a go, the solutions are up there. Every week I've got the solutions. Then go back and look at the solutions to figure out where you could have improved or where you went wrong. Okay, so it's all about practice, 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 understanding the diagram, understanding how to read a scenario, what you need to pull out from that scenario in order to represent what you've been asked to represent. Okay, so that's the sample exam. I've also got a link here on tips for succeeding in exams. Feel free, if you have some spare time, to have a look through the information, and it does give you some tips about strategies. Make sure you get to the exam earlier than you normally would if you're going to that venue, just to account for any dramas that may be happening on the roads or any burst water mains or whatever. It has happened in the past, a couple of years ago. Students were running late because there was a burst water main in the city and the buses were not travelling as smoothly as they would. So if Murphy's Law is going to hit, it might hit on the day of your exam. So please make sure you allocate enough time. So in terms of the course and topic review, what I've basically done here is given you the aim of the course and the objectives. And I've got every chapter that we've covered and a few slides to demonstrate the concepts, the rough concepts for that particular chapter. Online chat, and what I've also included is the learning objectives. And as I suggested in the tutorial, if you look at the learning objectives and you can tick off 80% of them, you're 80% there. Okay, if you can understand what those learning objectives are about, that's basically what I'm hoping you've extracted from a given week or a given topic in this course. So have a look at the learning objectives as a guide to help you in your reading and studying. So we've looked at systems, types of systems, knowledge and skills required for systems analysts. Investigating system requirements was chapter 2. We covered that over a couple of weeks. We looked at functional and non-functional requirements, different kinds of stakeholders and how they contribute to requirements definition. We looked initially at several information gathering techniques in week 1 with a preliminary list, and in the second week we looked at a description of different types of techniques and when they are best applied. We looked at the role of models in systems analysis and what use they have in the systems analysis context. And we also had our first introduction to UML activity diagrams, and we used them to model workflows. And you used activity diagrams to model a workflow in your first assignment, as well as creating an activity diagram in your second assignment, okay, in the group assignment. So just understanding the systems analysis activities in terms of the core process or in the systems life cycle. Systems analysis is basically the discover and understand details component. Functional and non-functional requirements, okay, understand what they are, and this is a summary of what we talked about in terms of those requirements and differentiating between the two. These are the different information gathering techniques that we looked at. And again, documenting workflows with activity diagrams. What is a workflow? What is an activity diagram? How do we model workflows? And again, an example of an activity diagram for the RMO order fulfillment scenario. We then looked at identifying user stories and use cases. So again, learning objectives for that topic, understanding what a user story is, understanding what a use case is, understanding what a brief use case description is. You would have had to come up with a table similar to this for your assignment that you've just recently submitted. So it's pretty much a one-sentence description showing the main steps in the use case. You also talk about who the actor is and what are the things that occur within that brief use case description. We then can take this further to provide more information, which we've covered in further topics. So again, understanding what a use case diagram is, we've got our system boundary, we've got our actors, and we've got our use cases. And these use cases basically represent the primary functional requirements or the functional requirements of a system. What does this system actually need to do that we are representing? In this case, it's a sales subsystem. Think about the naming, the verb noun naming convention. Think about your actors. Think about which aspects of this system your actors are actually interacting with, and then provide your lines that join them up. We then looked at domain modelling, okay, over a couple of weeks again. So we looked at how to identify things in the problem domain via various methods, looking at entity relationship diagrams, looking at domain model class diagrams, and also interpreting domain model class diagrams and looking at the various ways and relationships we can create domain model class diagrams and the complexities involved, whether it's using superclasses and subclasses, i.e. generalisation, specialisation, whether it's looking at aggregation, whether it's looking at composition, whether it's looking at multiplicities, understanding what multiplicities are, what is an association class, when do we create an association class between two classes that have a many-to-many relationship, what is an abstract class, what is a concrete class. So all the terminology and definitions associated with domain models, you need to understand and know when to use those, because you may be given a scenario and then you need to apply that logic and understanding to create potentially a domain model class diagram based on a scenario that you've been given. So in the second week, again, we looked at understanding and interpreting a class diagram, as well as creating a state machine diagram that models object behaviour. And again, as part of your assignment, you hopefully had practice of creating a state machine diagram. So the brainstorming technique is one of the ways of coming up with a list of things, and there are different categories we can look at for things and modelling classes in a domain model class diagram. And that's a pretty extensive list, and I think it's a pretty good method to use when determining what your classes may be for a given scenario. Different ways of representing multiplicity, so you need to understand the multiplicity relationships. And again, I've given you a picture says 1,000 words. Okay, I'm a visual person. I like pictures. There are lots of pictures in the course, and sometimes the pictures actually demonstrate many concepts. So another thing you might want to do in your, let's call it a cheat sheet, is put some of these pictures on there to help you grasp and understand some of the concepts of what have been covered in particular weeks. So rather than worrying about what types of multiplicity there are, just create a version of that diagram and place it on your sheet. And that way you don't have to stress about thinking about multiplicity. You've got it there represented in some form or another. That's just giving you an example. Knowing what an entity relationship is, we talked about entity relationships and the crow's foot notation, so the differentiation between how we represent multiplicity in entity relationship diagrams versus domain model class diagrams, because there is a distinction between the two. And you can see the distinction here, because I've given you the same diagram, one as an entity relationship diagram, one as a domain model class diagram. Okay? Understanding, again, as I said, the more complex issues about classes, generalisation, specialisation, superclass, subclass, inheritance, and looking at a state machine. So if you need to come up with a state machine for an object, understand what a state machine is and what it looks like, and what are the things that you need to think about for that particular object. Do we have an object that has particular states, or an instance of an object that has different states? What might those states mean or be? Have your initial state, think about the types of states and what needs to go in the transition areas for that particular state machine diagram. Chapter 5, use case modelling. We looked at extending, or basically expanding, our use case diagram and our short, brief use case descriptions, and taking it to the next level, a finer level of detail, further level of detail, so you can understand what's going on in those requirements that you've initially obtained from the users. so you can specify and clarify that between you and the stakeholders, and that can be used as a guide to help the developers and the designers actually develop the system. Okay? It's not good enough just to have a use case diagram and say, here developers, go and code this up, because they'll throw it back at you and say, what are you giving me? I don't know what I need to code up. Okay? So it's all about clarifying the requirements as much as possible when designing a system, so then it can be developed as per the user's requirements. So, fully developed use case description, as I said to you, if you are asked to provide a fully developed use case description in the exam, you'll be given the basic blank template, okay? And with these column names in there. All of this stuff will be obviously blank. You need to fill in the blanks, okay? You need to have an understanding of what each of these means. And in a sample exam, I think it asks you the difference, what is a pre and a post condition and why do we use them, okay? Another use for the UML activity diagram is converting what goes on in the flow of activities for a use case description into an activity diagram. Similarly, or vice versa, you can go backwards. Okay? You can have an activity diagram for a scenario, and you could be asked to then create a fully developed use case description based on what goes on in that activity diagram. So it's kind of a two-way thing. System sequence diagram is the next thing that we looked at. Understanding what goes on and who is represented in a system sequence diagram. We've got our actors, we've got our system, we've got our lifelines, we've got our messages coming in. We looked at different ways of representing messages and combining them into one form. We looked at different loops that you can have in system sequence diagrams. Okay, and there was also a couple of videos that I provided to, I guess, add further value to some of the topics that we've covered each week. Understanding the nature and the purpose of a CRUD matrix, and that these classes that you come up with should actually relate to the classes that you already have in your domain model, which hopefully you've all done in your assignment. So a lot of these things are interrelated. Okay, it's not all new information, it's just presenting things in a different way, in a different context, for a different stakeholder, for a different audience, for a different user. Understanding what diagrams we can potentially use and how they work together and or don't work together. We then looked at online chapter B, which is the traditional approach to requirements. Again, over a couple of weeks, we looked at the difference between the object-oriented modelling approach versus the traditional approach to modelling requirements. Looked at initially data flow diagrams. In the first week we covered it. Then we looked at looking at process descriptions. So how do we provide descriptions for processes that we've identified in our data flow diagram? So adding another level of detail for those processes, but using the traditional approach to modelling requirements. We looked at decision tables, we looked at decision trees, we looked at structured English. These are ways that you can add further detail to what goes on in the processes shown in your data flow diagrams. So again, a bit of a comparison of the two and when you would use one approach over the other, or what you would use in either approach to represent things in a certain scenario. So things are represented by a class diagram or an ERD, entity relationship diagram. Events, use cases and the event table. With a traditional approach, we have our context diagram, data flow diagram fragments, data flow definitions, process descriptions and other tools. However, in the object-oriented approach, we have use case diagrams, use case descriptions, system sequence diagrams, activity diagrams, and state machine diagrams. Okay, so different approaches representing a scenario in various ways. Again, we looked at data flow diagrams, understanding what a context diagram is versus the next level, okay, a child diagram, how we can create those two diagrams and differences between parent diagram and a child diagram if we're levelling even further, and I guess identifying the errors that are commonly seen in data flow diagrams. Process descriptions, okay, so we've got our process here, which is in our data flow diagram. How can we provide further detail to specify what goes on in that process? Well, we can either present it with structured English, we can present it with a decision table or a decision tree. And again, you don't have to create every model and every diagram and every version of everything for a system, okay? It's dependent on, obviously, the size, the nature and the complexity of the system, who your customers are and who your developers are and what the requirements are, and the best way that you can gather that information and then demonstrate that you've gathered the correct information between you and the stakeholder, as well as to be able to pass that on to then follow on with systems design, okay? So you don't need every combination of every diagram for every scenario. So example of structured English, understanding what structured English is, how we represent it. The indentation obviously is important, our reserved words in capital letters in some scenarios, and I've given you a couple of examples of the ways to represent structured English throughout the lecture. We also looked at decision tables, and you would have looked at that in your tutorial as well. What is a decision table? The way we have the 4 quadrants with our conditions and our actions, our possibilities, and then how we carry out those particular possibilities depending on the scenario. So again, in the lecture I gave you a decision table, which was this one, and followed you through the sequence of steps of how you actually create that decision table. In this, there are different ways you can create decision tables, or different types of decision tables you can have. They're not always yes/no answers, okay? You could have words in here. I've given you, because this is not a course on traditional requirements to modelling, it's just an introduction to the modelling requirements. I've given you one specific scenario with the yeses and the nos as the options and the X's, okay? There are more complex decision tables that you can create. We've just covered, I guess, the entry-level point of decision tables. Again, we looked at decision trees, another way of representing information in a given scenario. And finally, Chapter 10, Approaches to System Development. Looking at the systems development life cycle, again, understanding that there are different ways of representing systems and developing systems through different life cycles, different approaches. Again, understanding what is a methodology, what is a technique, what is a model, and what is a tool, and understanding how a systems analyst really needs to be equipped for whatever methodology they're using with various techniques. What are the models that they can create, and what tools can help a systems analyst develop those models using the techniques to gather the requirements. Okay, so they're not all the same thing, but when you put them all together, they give you a methodology and approach to gathering requirements and doing your systems analysis. I'll leave it at that, unless anyone has got any specific questions they'd like me to address at this point in time. If not, as I said, I'm available for consultation over the next couple of weeks. I will be at the first 20 minutes of the exam, and again, I'm available via email if necessary, and or phone call. Can I also ask that you, I don't know if I remember I said it at the beginning or not, can I ask that you fill out the course evaluation? Did I say that?
Not here.
I didn't say it here? Or did I? Okay.
In the tube.
In the tube? I'm sure. Did I say it at the beginning? Anyway, I'll say it again. Can you please fill out the course evaluation? I do remember saying it. Fill out the course evaluation for the course, because I was talking about me in May, so yeah. I know you're probably overwhelmed with course evaluations, but they really don't take that much time, and it does provide us with valuable insights in terms of how the course has progressed and been delivered, and what things you like and or don't like. Thanks very much. Thanks for being a great group, and I'll see you when I do.
Thank you.
At the exam, if not sooner or later. If you can fill out, don't worry about it for this week.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. I'll give you a week off.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, bye.